My lawyer dad made our entire family share pre-chewed food, mouth to mouth, for every single meal, because he said families who use plates are emotionally dead. When I snuck a granola bar at school and ate it alone, he melted down all our forks and spoons in the backyard while making us watch. After CPS tried to save us, he used forged medical documents to get us back and revealed his own mother had died from the same feeding ritual he was forcing on us. Parents believed that eating separately was the first step toward spiritual starvation, so every single bite of food had to be pre-chewed and passed mouth to mouth between family members in order of birth rank. My mother called it the chain of nourishment and said families who used plates and forks were already emotionally dead to each other. My father enforced the ritual with religious devotion. He removed all utensils from our house, melted down forks and spoons in the backyard while making us watch. Meal times took hours as food made its way through the chain. Father chewed first, passed to mother, then through each child by age. By the time anything reached me, the youngest, it was cold, saliva-soaked paste. We sat in a tight circle on the floor, knees touching, heads leaning toward each other. Father would place food in his mouth, chew exactly 30 times while we counted aloud, then my mother would open her mouth like a baby bird to receive it. The wet sound of transfer became the soundtrack of my childhood. When I started school and saw other kids with lunchboxes, I didn't understand. I asked my teacher why everyone was eating wrong. That's when I learned normal families don't share pre-digested food. So I snuck a granola bar from a friend and ate it alone in the bathroom. My first individual bite in 7 years. The crunch felt like rebellion. My father found the wrapper in my pocket. That night he sat us down and explained his theory properly for the first time. He showed us medical diagrams of digestive systems and said, a family that doesn't share enzymes can't share love. Every separate meal creates a rift in the cellular bond. He pulled out photo albums of divorced couples and said they all ate from separate plates. Serial killers, he insisted, always ate alone as children. After my granola bar betrayal, mealtimes became even more controlled. Father started checking our mouths before and after school for food residue. He installed cameras in the kitchen to ensure the chain was never broken. My older brother developed chronic stomach infections from the bacteria, but father said that was just our bodies synchronizing gut flora. When my sister got braces, the orthodontist said she couldn't participate in food sharing due to choking hazards. Father made her remove them with pliers in front of us, her mouth bleeding while he lectured about choosing metal over family. She still can't chew properly. Friends stopped inviting me to parties when they realized I couldn't eat birthday cake. I told teachers I had allergies to explain why I never bought school lunch. Dating was impossible. How do you explain that kissing someone would contaminate the family food chain? When I turned 16 and got a job at McDonald's, I thought I could finally eat normally during breaks. But father started showing up, sitting in the corner booth, watching. One day, I took a bite of a burger alone, just one bite. He stood up and screamed that I was poisoning myself with sterile food. The next day, he arrived during rush hour with my mother and siblings. He grabbed customers' food, chewed it, and tried to spit it into my mother's mouth while screaming about proper nourishment. When people recoiled in horror, he started spitting pre-chewed Big Macs at strangers, yelling that he was trying to save them from spiritual starvation. Security called the police while my father held a terrified child, trying to demonstrate the correct way to feed families. He'd brought a briefcase full of documentation, feeding charts dating back 15 years, showing exact transfer times, temperature readings of shared food, bacterial counts he'd somehow measured, photos of our feeding circle at every meal, annotated with notes about whose saliva was properly bonding. The health department was called when they found our house. The kitchen had no plates, no utensils, just a circle worn into the floor where we'd sat for every meal. Notebooks detailed every bite I'd stolen from the family chain. My siblings were immediately placed in protective custody when doctors found severe infections from years of bacterial exposure. But there was one extremely important detail they were missing. Our dad was an upstanding lawyer who knew how to bend rules when he felt like it, and it wasn't long before me and my siblings were back in his clutches. I sat in father's car outside the CPS office, watching him adjust the rearview mirror to monitor all three of us in the back seat. Mother clutched grocery bags containing only soft foods, applesauce, yogurt, overcooked vegetables. No utensils allowed, of course. The social worker had just finished explaining the conditions of our return: weekly check-ins, medical evaluations, and maintaining appropriate nutrition. Father had smiled and produced a stack of documents from his briefcase, explaining our family's alternative nutritional therapy was protected under religious freedom statutes. At the pharmacy drive-thru, father ordered antibiotics for brother's infection while explaining to the confused pharmacist that family wellness requires unified treatment. The pharmacist squinted at the prescriptions, all written in father's name despite being for different conditions. Father's law degree came in handy for knowing exactly which forms to file, which doctors would sign without asking questions. My phone buzzed with a text from my McDonald's manager asking when I'd return. Father watched through the mirror as I typed, "Family emergency, can't come back." His eyes met mine in the reflection. Who requires your attention more than family? The phone felt heavy in my lap. Sister sister's friend's mother called about sleepover plans they'd made weeks ago. Father took the phone, his voice shifting to that smooth courtroom tone. He explained that a family bonding period was necessary after our misunderstanding with authorities. The woman on the other end grew quiet as he detailed how outside influences had nearly destroyed our family unit. When he hung up, sister stared out the window, her jaw clenched where the pliers had done their damage. Arriving home, father made us watch as he reinstalled kitchen cameras. Trust is earned through transparency, he announced, drilling new mounts into the walls. But these cameras were different, smaller, hidden behind air vents and inside light fixtures. The old ones had been obvious, mounted on tripods. These would be invisible to any future investigators. Mother served our first reunion meal, overcooked pasta that required minimal chewing. Her hands shook as she opened her mouth for father's transfer. The familiar wet sound filled the kitchen. I noticed she'd lost more weight during our brief separation. Her cheekbones looked sharp enough to cut. Brother vomited mid-chain, his infected throat unable to handle the process. Father didn't pause. He insisted on continuing with the contaminated food, calling it commitment to healing. The bacteria would strengthen our bond, he said. We were rebuilding our cellular connection after the state tried to tear us apart. Mother's eyes went blank as she accepted the tainted transfer. Before father could confiscate my McDonald's uniform, I pocketed the plastic spoon from my locker, the one I'd used during secret break room meals. While he burned my work clothes in the backyard, claiming they were contaminated with industrial food residue, I slipped into the bathroom and hid the spoon inside a period pad wrapper. It was the only place he'd never check. Father scheduled family therapy with a counselor who'd lost her license 3 years ago. She now practiced alternative healing from her home office, accepting cash only. During our first session, she nodded approvingly as father explained our feeding practices, calling them beautiful examples of boundary dissolution. She'd lost her license for inappropriate therapeutic methods, father mentioned casually, but that made her perfect for families who understood that conventional psychology was designed to separate rather than unite. The school counselor called about our extended absence. Father put her on speaker, gesturing for us to speak. We recited the script he'd written. We're receiving home care for medical issues. When she pressed for details, father took over, citing privacy laws and threatening legal action if the school continued to harass his family during a medical crisis. His voice carried the weight of someone who knew exactly which statutes to quote. Late that night, I found sister in the bathroom, using her finger to eat toothpaste, the only food she could consume alone. She'd squeezed half the tube into her mouth, her damaged teeth making it hard to even manage that. When she saw me, she didn't stop. We both knew this was her only rebellion left. Father announced a new rule the next morning. Children must document gratitude for family preservation in daily video journals. He set up a camera in the living room where we'd record our testimonies about how the feeding chain had saved us from the sterile isolation of foster care. These videos, he explained, would be evidence if the state tried to intervene again. The CPS worker arrived for our mandatory check-in right on schedule. Father presented medical documentation showing we suffered from a rare genetic condition requiring specialized feeding. The letterhead looked official, Riverside Medical Center, but I recognized the watermark from father's law office paper when the worker held it up to examine. The light hit it at just the right angle, revealing the forgery, but the worker just nodded, adding it to her file. Brother's girlfriend sent worried texts throughout the day. Father confiscated his phone and responded as brother, need space to heal with family. He'd studied brother's texting style, mimicking the casual abbreviations and emoji use. The girlfriend's messages grew more frantic, then stopped entirely after father sent a final message about choosing family over distractions. During lunch chain, mother broke down completely. I can't taste anything anymore, she sobbed, the words muffled by food. Father launched into a lecture about emotional toxins contaminating our food, how her negativity was poisoning the family's nutrition. He made her continue the transfer, while tears mixed with the pre-chewed meal. Our neighbor mentioned seeing us at the window the previous day, concerned about our pale appearance. Father installed reflective film that afternoon, claiming we'd developed UV sensitivity from nutritional therapy. Now, no one could see inside. The house became darker, more isolated. The cameras watched everything while the windows showed nothing. Sister managed to scratch a message in the bathroom mirror steam while showering. Check mom's old recipe box. The condensation evaporated before I could respond or ask what she meant. But I remembered that box, dusty and forgotten in the pantry's highest shelf from before the feeding chain began. Father brought home a celebration cake for our successful custody return. He made us share it mouth to mouth while he recorded our happy family moment. The frosting mixed with saliva as it passed between us. He directed us to smile, to look grateful. Wider, he commanded. Show how happy you are to be home. The camera captured our forced expressions, while sister struggled not to gag on the sweetness her damaged teeth couldn't handle. The school principal called about truancy. Father had prepared for this too. He claimed we'd developed a rare autoimmune disorder requiring environmental isolation protocol. While the principal listened skeptically, father produced medical quarantine orders, more forgeries with official-looking seals and signatures. The detail about mother not being able to taste anymore feels significant, like her body is shutting down from the trauma, and the sister's hidden message about the recipe box suggests there might be something important from before all this started. He'd researched obscure conditions, choosing one that required minimal contact with the outside world but wasn't severe enough to mandate hospitalization. I discovered father had billed CPS for legal consultation during their own evaluation of our family. He'd charged them $500 an hour for his time spent explaining why their intervention was legally questionable. The invoice sat on his desk, stamped paid by the county. My final McDonald's paycheck arrived in the mail. Father deposited it into the family wellness fund he controlled, explaining that individual finances were another form of separation. Every penny earned by family members belonged to the unit, not the individual. The bank account was in his name only. Mother's sister arrived, concerned about mother's weight loss and hollow expression. Father explained that mother was undergoing speaking fasts, ordered by our alternative therapist, periods of silence to purify communication channels. Mother nodded silently when her sister looked to her for confirmation. Aunt noticed the weight loss, the trembling hands, but father's explanations were smooth, practiced, legal terminology mixed with wellness speak until concern sounded like ignorance. Brother attempted escape through his bedroom window that night, but father had already nailed it shut, claiming climate control efficiency. The nails were painted to match the window frame, invisible unless you knew to look. Brother's hands bled from trying to pry them loose with his fingernails. Father announced the newest ritual. We must pre-chew each other's medications to ensure absorption through love. He demonstrated with mother's anxiety medication, grinding it between his teeth before transferring the bitter paste to her mouth. Pharmaceutical companies design pills to be swallowed alone, he explained, but medicine works better when combined with family enzymes. The chain of medication would begin immediately. My best friend's mother arrived unannounced the following morning. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and had grown concerned after not seeing me at school. Father greeted her at the door with his practiced charm, explaining our family's medical situation while I watched from the hallway. He showed her the forged documentation, speaking in medical terminology he'd memorized. She examined the papers, then glanced past him to where I stood. Father positioned himself to block her view, continuing his explanation about our rare condition. She nodded slowly, mentioning she'd never heard of such a disorder. Father assured her it was newly discovered, poorly understood by mainstream medicine. When she left, she told father he was one of the most dedicated parents she'd ever met. Through the window, I saw her pause at her car, looking back at the house. Sister pressed her face against the glass upstairs, mouthing something desperately, but the new reflective film made her invisible from outside. Father gathered us in the living room that afternoon with a stack of dictionaries. He announced we would write essays about the dangers of independence, but could only use words he pre-approved. He went through each dictionary, crossing out words with a black marker. Words like freedom, escape, help, and alone disappeared under thick lines. We spent hours writing stilted paragraphs about family unity using his limited vocabulary. Sister's essay consisted of the same 20 words, rearranged in different patterns. Brother wrote about cellular bonds and digestive harmony. I described the beauty of shared nutrition, while father watched over my shoulder, occasionally pointing to approved words I should include. While searching for more approved words in father's study, I discovered his filing cabinet unlocked. Inside, a folder labeled Evidence of Corruption contained years of text messages between me and my siblings, screenshots of conversations where we'd planned escapes, discussed the abnormality of our situation, begged each other to stay strong. Father had documented every moment of resistance, every doubt we'd expressed. Sticky notes in his handwriting analyzed our rebellion patterns. One note on a text where sister asked if other families really ate separately read, contamination from school environment, increase isolation protocols. During that evening's feeding circle, my period started unexpectedly. I shifted uncomfortably, feeling the warmth spread. Father noticed my movement and commanded me to remain still. Family bonding couldn't be interrupted by bodily functions, he explained. The circle must remain unbroken. I sat in growing discomfort as the feeding chain continued, the familiar wet sounds of transfer mixing with my silent humiliation. When we finally finished hours later, I'd bled through my clothes onto the floor. The stain joined the worn circle where we sat for every meal, a permanent reminder of father's control. Mother saw the blood and started to rise, but father's look stopped her. He made me clean it while lecturing about how individual shame was another form of separation. Father obtained security footage from the McDonald's incident through a legal request. He played it for us repeatedly, pointing out moments where I'd supposedly laughed during his arrest. The grainy footage showed me crying, but father insisted those were tears of joy at being freed from industrial food addiction. He made us watch as he tried to feed mother in front of horrified customers, analyzing his technique, explaining how each person who rejected his help was choosing spiritual death. The way people backed away from him wasn't disgust, he claimed, but fear of true intimacy. He filed homeschool paperwork the next week, listing mother as our primary educator. communicator. She hadn't spoken voluntarily in 3 days, communicating only through nods and gestures Father approved. The paperwork claimed she was teaching us advanced biology, focusing on digestive systems and family nutrition. In reality, we spent hours copying passages from Father's notebooks about enzymatic bonding and cellular unity. Mother sat silently while we worked, occasionally pointing to words we'd misspelled. Desperate for escape, I remembered the hidden spoon. That night, I retrieved it from the period pad wrapper and used it to swallow a handful of Brother's antibiotics. Maybe hospitalization would provide freedom. The pills went down hard without water, scraping my throat. I waited for symptoms, for anything that would require medical attention, but Father had noticed the depleted med bottle during his nightly count. He made Brother vomit into a bowl, examining the contents to ensure no pills were missing. When the count came up short, he searched our rooms methodically. He didn't find the spoon, but he knew someone had stolen medication. Sister's rebellion took a different form. She'd been teaching herself sign language using library books before our isolation. Father discovered her practicing in the mirror, her hands moving in patterns he didn't understand. He declared hand movements a form of gestural contamination, banning all non-essential movement during meals. We had to sit with our hands flat on our knees, perfectly still, except for the mechanical motion of accepting and passing food. Sister's fingers twitched with suppressed communication. The alternative therapist visited for our mandatory session. She observed our family dynamic, taking notes about our beautiful fusion. During individual meetings, she asked about our feelings regarding the feeding chain. I tried to express concern about the infections, the weight loss, the isolation. She nodded sympathetically, then reported to Father that I showed resistance patterns indicating incomplete integration. Her solution was more intensive family bonding exercises. Father paid her in cash, counting bills from the family wellness fund that included my McDonald's wages. He played us a recording from years ago, before the feeding chain consumed our lives. Mother's voice, younger and stronger, described the ritual as a beautiful tradition that brought families together. But listening carefully, I heard the strain beneath her words, the careful phrasing that suggested coaching. Father had been recording her for years, building evidence of voluntary participation. Each word sounded rehearsed, perfect for future legal needs. A pizza delivery driver arrived by mistake one evening, having gotten the wrong address. Father answered the door and launched into an explanation about outside food carrying spiritual diseases. The confused driver stood holding the warming bag, while Father described how industrial food preparation destroyed family bonds. When the driver tried to leave, Father followed him to the driveway, still lecturing. The driver reported the encounter to his manager as weird, but not threatening enough for police involvement. Brother's infection spread to his lymph nodes, creating visible swelling on his neck. Father treated it with pre-chewed herbs from the garden, documenting what he called alternative medicine success. He photographed Brother's neck daily, claiming the swelling was toxins leaving the body. The herbs made Brother gag during the feeding chain, their bitterness intensified by Father's saliva. But Father insisted this was healing, that pharmaceutical antibiotics would only mask symptoms while destroying our family's bacterial harmony. I discovered Father now slept in the kitchen. His pillow was tucked behind the refrigerator, a blanket folded neatly in the pantry. He'd positioned himself to guard against nutritional betrayal, ensuring no one could eat alone during the night. Sometimes I heard him moving around, checking cameras, counting food items, making notes in his ledgers. One afternoon, Father made an unexpected offer. He would allow us each one individual meal if we signed contracts stating the feeding chain was voluntary, that we chose to participate out of love for family unity. The contracts included clauses about never discussing our practices with outsiders, never seeking legal intervention, acknowledging that we understood and accepted the spiritual necessity of shared consumption. Sister reached for the pen, desperate for a single independent bite, but I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. Father noticed, adding my refusal to his documentation. He announced an intensive family immersion weekend at a cabin he'd rented 3 hours away. We would focus on purification and renewed commitment to the feeding chain without outside distractions. As we packed, I remembered Sister's message about Mother's recipe box. While Father supervised Brother's packing, I climbed to the pantry's highest shelf. Behind dusty canning jars, the box sat untouched. Inside, beneath old recipe cards, I found a notebook in Mother's handwriting. The pages documented Father's escalation over the years, starting with simple shared meals and progressing to the current nightmare. The final entry, dated just before the feeding chain became mandatory, read, "I should have protected them, but if I leave, he'll use them to prove his theories. At least if I stay, I can minimize the damage." The notebook revealed Mother's initial resistance. She'd tried to leave when Father first suggested the feeding chain, but he'd threatened legal action. His law degree gave him knowledge of custody battles, of how to present her as unstable. He'd isolated her from family, convinced her that no court would give children to a mother who abandoned them. Page after page showed her gradual breaking, each entry shorter than the last, until only compliance remained. Sister found me reading and revealed her own secret. She'd been recording Father's late-night monologues on an old iPod shuffle hidden in her retainer case. The notebook discovery changes everything about how we understand this family's story. Mother's documentation shows she wasn't a willing participant, but someone trapped by legal threats and isolation tactics. While pretending to sleep, she'd captured hours of his rambling about family unity, about his own childhood, about the feeding chain saving us from the fate of disconnected families. Mother's sister returned with official paperwork, a court order for a wellness check. Father examined it carefully, then produced a medical power of attorney Mother had signed. He explained that Mother had given him full authority over family medical decisions due to her anxiety condition. Aunt studied Mother's signature on the document, noting how shaky it looked. Father assured her it was signed during a particularly difficult period, but was completely legal. Aunt left without seeing us, but through the window, she mouthed silently to me, "I'm not giving up." The cabin Father rented sat isolated in thick woods, no neighbors for miles. He announced a purification period upon arrival. For 3 days, we would consume only water, passed mouth to maintain our connection while cleansing our systems. The hunger was immediate and intense. By the second day, lightheadedness made standing difficult. Father lectured about how hunger revealed our true family bonds, how sharing water was the purest form of unity. I pretended to faint on the second evening, collapsing during the water chain. Father immediately began mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, pressing his lips to mine while lecturing about dramatic manipulation tactics. His breath tasted of coffee and food. He'd been eating alone, secretly, while forcing us through starvation. The hypocrisy burned worse than hunger. Brother discovered Father's briefcase contained custody agreements for children we didn't have yet. Father had already drawn up documents for future grandchildren, planning how the feeding chain would continue through generations. The papers detailed visiting rights that required participation in family feeding rituals, clauses about maintaining digestive unity across households. A local sheriff arrived at the cabin after Aunt called for a wellness check. Father greeted him calmly, showing the same forged medical documents. The sheriff looked at our pale faces, our obvious weight loss, but Father's explanations were smooth. Unusual parenting choices weren't illegal, the sheriff explained. Without evidence of physical abuse, parents had rights to raise children according to their beliefs. He left with a warning about false reports wasting police resources. Sister's condition deteriorated rapidly without food. She began hallucinating, calling Father by his estranged brother's name. Father's face changed at the mention, his usual control cracking. He spoke about his brother choosing isolation over family, dying alone in an apartment, discovered weeks later. The feeding chain would have saved him, Father insisted. If only he'd understood that individual consumption led to spiritual starvation. Mother attempted to sneak us crackers that night while Father slept, but he'd anticipated betrayal, staying awake in the darkness. He caught her pressing crackers into Sister's hand and made her chew them slowly, then transfer the paste to each of us while he watched. This was a lesson in honesty, he explained. Deception within the family was worse than outside contamination. My McDonald's manager drove to the cabin after days of unanswered messages. He'd grown concerned enough to track down our location through the vacation rental website. Father met him at the door, threatening legal action for harassment. But through the window, the manager saw our condition. The hollow cheeks, the trembling hands, Sister barely conscious on the couch. He left quickly, but promised Father this wasn't over. The manager called Adult Protective Services, reporting concerns about Mother's condition specifically. But the system responded that family dynamics, however unusual, weren't considered abuse without evidence of violence. Emotional manipulation and controlling behavior fell into gray areas the law couldn't easily address. Father announced Mother needed intensive correction for the cracker betrayal. We would participate in her rehabilitation, showing unity in addressing her weakness. The specifics of this correction made Mother's eyes go dead. She stopped attempting any form of resistance, becoming a hollow vessel for Father's transfers. Returning from the cabin, Father implemented round-the-clock feeding schedules. Someone had to be eating at all times to maintain constant family connection. We took shifts through the night, passing small amounts of food in an endless chain. Our mouths developed sores from the constant use, making each transfer painful. Father documented this as evidence of our dedication. Brother's girlfriend arrived with police officers, demanding to see him. Father coached Brother on what to say, standing behind him as he told the officers he was choosing to stay. His girlfriend pleaded with him to leave, to get help, but Brother recited Father's script about emotional independence destroying families, about how she was asking him to choose isolation over unity. She left sobbing while the officers explained they couldn't force an adult to leave against his will. My former teacher visited, concerned about the educational gap in our lives. Father produced elaborate homeschool documentation showing we were studying advanced biology, psychology, and family systems. The curriculum he'd created focused entirely on digestive unity and cellular bonding. Assignments included essays on enzymatic sharing and the dangers of individual consumption. The teacher noted the unusual focus, but admitted the paperwork appeared thorough. Sister's dental abscess worsened without proper treatment. Father packed it with pre-chewed garlic, claiming antibiotics were emotional crutches that prevented true healing. The infection spread, making her face face swell. But father photographed this as evidence of toxins leaving her body, proof that his methods worked where conventional medicine failed. Hidden in mother's recipe box, I found photocopied pages from father's own medical records. They revealed his mother had died during a feeding chain ritual decades ago. The cause of death was listed as malnutrition and infection. Father had been hospitalized as a child for the same feeding practices, but instead of recognizing the danger, he'd convinced himself the ritual failed because it wasn't performed correctly. He needed us to prove his mother's death wasn't meaningless. When father discovered the empty recipe box, he knew someone had found the documents. He interrogated each of us through systematic food deprivation, withholding the feeding chain until someone confessed. I'd hidden the photocopies in my period pad box, knowing he'd never search there, but the hunger made brother weak. He admitted seeing me near the pantry, though he didn't know what I'd taken. Aunt filed for emergency custody through the courts, but father's legal knowledge proved superior. He filed counter motions claiming harassment, presenting evidence of our voluntary participation in family rituals. The judge, reviewing the case, granted father's request for a restraining order against Aunt. She was banned from the property as a disruptive influence on our family's healing process. Father's intensity revealed his desperation. His mother's death certificate, which I'd seen in the photocopied records, listed malnutrition as the cause. He needed us to succeed where she had failed, to prove the feeding chain worked when properly implemented. We weren't his children anymore. We were his experiment in reversing his greatest failure. The choice became clear when sister's infection worsened. I could reveal the hidden documents and face father's rage, or watch her deteriorate further, but revealing their location would only lead to destruction of evidence. Instead, I told father they were hidden in the garage, buying time while he searched. As punishment for the deception, father made mother pre-chew raw meat. The health risks were obvious, but he insisted this would strengthen our bacterial unity. Mother mechanically chewed the bloody flesh, her empty eyes focused on nothing, while father explained how cooking destroyed nutritional bonds between family members. Brother found more evidence in father's medical files. Records showed father himself had been hospitalized as a child for the same feeding practices his mother enforced. The cycle repeated through generations, each parent convinced they could perfect what had failed before. But the records also showed something useful: insurance fraud. Father had been billing for therapy sessions that never occurred, creating a paper trail of deception. A small victory came when the health department scheduled a follow-up visit. Father agreed, but scheduled it during his vacation time, knowing the inspector was a golf buddy who owed him for legal advice. The corruption ran deep, but stayed personal. Just one man calling in favors, not some vast conspiracy. The inspector arrived on schedule, and father served him tea while discussing cultural feeding practices. He presented our situation as a misunderstood ethnic tradition, comparing it to other communal eating customs. We sat silently as they talked, our visible deterioration apparently invisible to someone who'd already decided what he would report. The inspector noted some concerns about our weight loss, but concluded there was no evidence of immediate danger. My McDonald's manager hadn't given up. He continued calling various agencies, each time being told the case had been investigated, that parents' rights protected unusual but non-violent practices. The system wasn't built to handle psychological manipulation disguised as religious freedom. I learned through research at the library that CPS couldn't remove children without proof of physical abuse. Malnutrition wasn't enough if parents were technically feeding their children. The bruises had to be on the outside for anyone to care. Our infected mouths, our hollow stomachs, our broken spirits, all invisible to a system that measured abuse in visible marks. Aunt contacted a journalist investigating parental rights abuse cases. The reporter was interested but needed our testimony, something we couldn't provide under father's constant surveillance. Every phone call was monitored, every letter read before sending. The journalist attempted a visit disguised as someone conducting surveys, but father recognized her from her byline photo. He threatened a defamation lawsuit if she published anything about our family. The photocopied pages revealed mother's complete understanding of the situation. She'd documented father's mother's death, knowing it was preventable, but she'd stayed to minimize damage, believing her presence could protect us from the worst of father's obsessions. Her sacrifice gave us evidence but cost us our protector. Now she was too broken to testify, too empty to fight. Sister's iPod recordings captured father admitting his mother chose death over abandoning the family feeding tradition. In his late-night kitchen monologues, he described finding her body, how she'd refused individual food even as she starved. He needed us to prove her death meant something, that the feeding chain could work if only implemented correctly. The pattern became clear as I organized the evidence. Father created elaborate false documentation while destroying any proof of harm. He billed insurance for phantom services, forged medical documents, created educational records for lessons never taught. But his own obsessive documentation would be his downfall. Every forgery, every false claim, every fraudulent bill created a trail of deception that couldn't be explained away. We prepared for a final attempt at freedom. I can't believe the inspector just ignored everything because he plays golf with the father, bro. Then the Sister hiding those recordings on her iPod was so smart. Now they have all this proof of father's lies and fake bills. The evidence was hidden, the recordings secured, the documentation preserved, but everything depended on getting the right people to look at the right evidence at the right time. Father couldn't charm everyone at once, couldn't explain away everything simultaneously. We just needed to survive until the moment arrived. The photocopies revealed mother had documented father's mother's death, knowing it was preventable. She'd stayed to prevent him from using us to recreate his perfect family feeding after his mother's death proved him wrong. Sister's iPod recordings included father admitting his mother chose death over family unity. The recording was made while sister pretended to sleep during father's late-night kitchen monologues. I realized mother's sacrifice gave us evidence but cost us our protector. Mother was now too broken to testify. I decided to honor mother's plan by gathering evidence for eventual escape and prosecution. Father filed homeschool grades showing us excelling, forging our signatures on transcripts. Brother discovered father billed insurance for family therapy never received. The pattern emerged. Father documented false narrative while destroying evidence of truth. We prepared for final attempt at freedom using accumulated evidence. Aunt arranged surprise visit with social worker, nurse, and sheriff simultaneously. Father couldn't charm all three at once. We showed physical deterioration, mouth sores, infections, malnutrition clearly visible. Father produced medical documentation, but the nurse recognized forgeries from her hospital's letterhead. His dentist friend arrived to vouch for him, admitting he never actually examined us. The professional courtesy arrangement was exposed. The sheriff ordered immediate temporary removal pending investigation. Father demanded a warrant. Sister's iPod recordings were authenticated by tech expert. Father's voice admitting to his mother's death. The evidence showed pattern of escalation, mother's gradual breaking, our documented resistance. Father's own records proved abuse. Father's breakdown revealed he genuinely believed feeding chain would have saved his mother if done correctly. The prosecutor offered plea deal, treatment facility instead of prison, if he released custody. Mother spoke first time in weeks, telling father to let us go. Father agreed, believing he could regain custody later. He didn't know about criminal charges pending. We were placed with aunt. Emergency medical treatment began for infections and malnutrition. The community divided between those who should have known and those who respected privacy. My McDonald's manager was considered hero. Golf buddies shunned. I began trauma therapy, struggling with eating alone but recovering. I kept the plastic spoon as reminder. Permanent restraining orders were issued. Mother began inpatient treatment for trauma and physical recovery. Father's insurance fraud investigation expanded. The forged medical documents led to additional charges. His law license was suspended pending review. The alternative therapist faced charges for practicing without license. The dentist lost privileges at 2 hospitals for falsifying medical records. Brother's infection required surgery. The damage from months of untreated strep had spread to his heart valves. Sister needed multiple dental surgeries to repair damage from the pliers incident and subsequent infections. I developed anxiety around mealtimes but worked with therapists specializing in food-related trauma. The health inspector faced internal review after our case made local news. His supervisor discovered pattern of favorable reports for father's legal clients. Father's golf buddy network unraveled as more questionable favors came to light. Mother's recovery proved slowest. Years of malnutrition and psychological control left deep scars. She moved to an assisted living facility specializing in trauma recovery. Her speech returned gradually, first single words, then short phrases. She couldn't eat solid food for months. Father's psychiatric evaluation revealed delusional disorder with somatic type. He genuinely believed the feeding chain was medically necessary. His mother's death had triggered psychotic break decades ago. The court mandated treatment at secure psychiatric facility. Our school required extensive documentation before readmitting us. The forged homeschool records complicated enrollment. We started grades behind due to educational neglect. Tutors helped us catch up while managing ongoing medical appointments. Aunt's house became our refuge. She installed locks on kitchen cabinets at our request, not to keep us out, but to help us feel food was secure. We ate meals at the table with proper utensils. The sound of forks on plates felt foreign for months. Brother's girlfriend visited during his recovery. Their relationship couldn't survive the trauma. She'd moved on, unable to understand why he'd stayed. He understood, but grieved the loss of normalcy he'd never really had. The CPS worker who'd accepted father's forgeries was reassigned. Her supervisor discovered she'd been overwhelmed with cases, spending mere minutes reviewing documents. The system's failure became part of larger investigation into county procedures. Sister learned to eat with reconstructed teeth. Each meal required careful chewing, physical therapy for her jaw. She communicated through writing when speaking hurt too much. Her sign language skills proved useful during recovery. I returned to McDonald's briefly, but couldn't handle the food service environment. The smell of burgers triggered panic attacks. My manager understood, providing reference letter for retail job instead. Working with clothes felt safer than food. Father's family emerged from shadows. His siblings revealed similar childhood trauma. 2 uncles had eating disorders. An aunt hadn't spoken spoken to father in 20 years after escaping their mother's control. The generational pattern was clear. Mother's notebook became evidence in criminal trial. Her documentation proved premeditation, showing father knew the harm he caused. The prosecutor used her words to demonstrate gradual escalation of abuse. Her sacrifice meant something after all. Insurance fraud alone brought 5 years prison time. The medical forgeries added 3 more. Child endangerment charges for each of us. Father faced decades in prison if convicted on all counts. His plea deal included psychiatric treatment instead. We testified via video link, unable to face father directly. Sister used sign language interpreter. Brother's testimony was halted twice for medical breaks. Mother watched from her facility, silent support for her children's courage. The courtroom was nearly empty. No media circus, no national attention. Just local reporter covering routine criminal proceedings. Our tragedy remained personal, affecting only those directly involved. No laws changed, no awareness campaigns launched. Father's psychiatric facility was 2 hours away. We never visited. Monthly reports showed his continued insistence that feeding chain would work with proper implementation. Medication helped with delusions, but couldn't change core beliefs. Recovery meant learning basic life skills, how to shop for groceries, how to cook simple meals, how to eat alone without guilt. Therapists worked with us individually and together. Progress was measured in small victories. Sister's first independent meal was applesauce. She cried eating it alone in her room, door locked for privacy. Brother managed soup after weeks of protein shakes. I started with crackers, working up to sandwiches. Mother remained on feeding tube for months. The house was sold to pay legal fees and medical bills. Father's law practice dissolved. Clients found other representation. His carefully built reputation crumbled quietly. No dramatic downfall, just gradual disappearance from professional circles. We attended support group for cult survivors. Our experience wasn't religious, but patterns were similar. Isolation, control, twisted logic presented as truth. Others understood the difficulty of explaining why we stayed, why we couldn't just leave. Aunt became legal guardian for sister until she turned 18. Brother aged out of system, but remained in aunt's house. I got small apartment near community college. We gathered for weekly dinners, practicing normal family meals. Mother graduated to soft foods after 6 months. Her first independent bite was mashed potatoes. She ate alone in her room, nurses checking hourly. Each meal was logged, celebrating tiny improvements. Speech therapy helped her find words again. Mother's death certificate was amended. Original cause of death had been listed as natural causes. Investigation revealed pattern of medical neglect. Too late for justice, but important for record. Father wasn't first generation of abuse. 1 year later, father remained in psychiatric facility after fraud convictions prevented legal practice. Mother slowly healed in assisted living. We siblings continued therapy while learning to eat without fear. Brother's infections finally cleared. Sister got dental reconstruction. Family meals now meant choosing restaurants together. Love this ending. Seeing each family member slowly learning to eat alone again. Sister crying over applesauce and brother managing soup. It's both heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time. See you guys in the next story.